Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started with some general introductions and opening remarks. Hopefully you're all in the right place, some familiar faces for sure. Welcome to the Museums and Emerging Pathogens in the Americas Network, or the MEPA network. As many of you know, we are a virtual community of practice that aims to better connect museum biorepositories with biomedicine or biomedical initiatives and wildlife surveillance across the Americas. If this is your first MEPA session, please introduce yourself in the chat. We don't have time to go around. We don't necessarily want to call you out, but we're happy you're here. Please include your name, affiliation, and the country you're from, and welcome to our group. Before we get started, we have a couple reminders. MEPA sessions are recorded, so you can see that it is recording in the top right corner. And by being here, you are agreeing or consenting to being recorded. If possible, please leave your camera on. It's always easier to talk to a room full of people than to a screen full of names. This is especially true for the discussion portion of our MEPA session, and we will remind you to turn cameras on at that time too. I want to remind the group that the discussion is for everyone, regardless of your career stage, your native language, or your level of experience. Please contribute to the discussion. The more perspectives and disciplines and people that we have speaking up, the better the discussions are. You may speak in whatever your native language is or whatever language you are most comfortable with. We generally have enough people here that can help with English, Spanish, or Portuguese, help with translation so we can all understand. Please add your name to the notes document that Danny has shared. We may need to reshare it again for people who joined a little later. In addition to adding your name, please feel free to add comments, questions, or links to that document as we go, as it's a resource that we can collectively build and then refer back to later. If you have not formally registered for the network, I'm not sure how you got here, but you can use the link that I just posted to register. You're also welcome to share that link with anyone who might be interested in registering. Also, as part of the MEPA network, we invite you to join our WhatsApp channel. So I've added a link, an invitation to our WhatsApp, and we can continue the conversation there, as well as posting other opportunities, new science discoveries, and collaborations. One new initiative that we are working on is better tracking of some of the connections and collaborations that have been built through MEPA. This is as small as contacting a new museum because you didn't even know that they existed, or depositing your material somewhere for the first time, or collaboratively leading a workshop or hosting a guest lecture. And Danny, if you could add the link for that spreadsheet to the chat, that would be super helpful. And we encourage all MEPA members to add their experiences there. I've added a couple just to get us started. Obviously, things like funding and workshops and publications are easy to track, but we would also like to see some of the less metrics-driven opportunities that may have been sparked by MEPA. So with that, I'm going to introduce today's speakers. Today we have Greg Watkins-Colwell and Cameron Pittman with us today. Greg is a senior collection manager at Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History, and Cameron is an assistant collection manager at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And today they're going to share about the ZooMu network, bridging gaps between zoos and museum collections. And we will learn a little more about how this network proposes to link zoos and natural history museums to create a more comprehensive and integrated source for biological research. The network is funded by NSF, and I will post a link to their website here. Feel free to check that out. And Greg and Cameron, go for it.
All right, thanks. So I will start, and then I will hand it over to Cameron. Can you see my full screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So the ZooMu network is meant to connect the dots between zoos and museums, and for some reason I'm not advancing. There we go. Ta-da. All right. So this is an NSF-funded project, and one of the goals we want to have at the end is that zoos and aquariums and natural history museums are collectively thought of as biodiversity collections. Whether or not it is alive, it's biodiversity, it's useful for research, there are data associated with it. And we recognize that zoos and aquariums have rich, deep data from the animal when it was alive, including, who its mommy and daddy were, and, what it ate and how many times it's had babies, and did it ever have a disease, and on and on and on. And natural history museums have a wealth of data, basically starting with the day the animal died. So we have from that point forward, they have all the time before that. So why not connect all those dots? These are the 4 co-PIs for the project, and we are 2 zoo people and really 2 museum people, although Alex doesn't actually say he's a museum person there. He used to work here, so he's a museum person. All right. We have an advisory board and a steering committee that is a diverse background of, well, some zoo people, some museum people, some data management people, and even a couple botanists. One of the things we recognized early on is that botanical gardens and herbaria often go hand in hand. And oftentimes an herbarium will have in its collection tissue samples or herbarium sheets of plants still alive in the botanical garden. So it's a pretty good model to look at for how this could work. Early conversations we had about living collections included, well, basically the biological collections committee or community had largely ignored zoos and aquariums, not knowing how to treat them. And that probably came mostly from a lack of understanding of what zoos and aquariums have and how they operate and what kinds of data they will have in their databases. I wanted to show you a little bit of a timeline. We spent 5 years working on this before we even applied for an NSF grant. So in 2019, following a symposium at the joint meeting of ichthyologists and herpetologists, the symposium was on the expanding role of natural history collections. The 4 of us got together and decided that zoos and aquariums needed to be part of this conversation. We had an online, it was not going to be online, but it became online because 2020 was a strange year. It's like 2 or 3 day symposium sponsored by iDigBio. And then we had ZooMu 2, which was also supposed to be in person, but ended up being online, also by iDigBio. We published a paper in Bioscience about zoo and museum work collaboratively and bridging the gaps. In 2023, we had symposia at 4 conferences: the Joint Meeting of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists, the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections, the Zoo Registrars Association, and the American Zoo and Aquarium mid-year meeting. And then in 2024, we got the NSF funding to do the network building. So in a sense, we spent 5 years getting ready to be busy. Concurrent to all of the 5 years of getting ready, some other cool things happened. Spinach amended its bylaws to include the term living collections, to make it perfectly clear that living collections are part of natural history. And Spinach included living collections in the 10-year strategic plan for the organization. At the same time, the AZA said that part of conservation and population management should include developing an agreement to transfer or donate non-living animals, which we might say dead, to non-AZA entities such as universities and museums. And I pointed that out because one of the things we've discovered is we have different vocabularies. So that's okay. But so the natural history world includes living collections as natural history, and the zoo world recognizes that when it's no longer a living animal to display, it should go somewhere else. Early on, we learned a few pretty good lessons that helped us frame what we're going to do with the actual network building grant. Most importantly is there's a mutual lack of understanding between zoos and museums. Zoos didn't really understand what museums do, or even that museums have a collection that's not on exhibit. All right, that was not known. And museums largely didn't know that zoos do research. So there are two very important things that people did not know about each other. All right, so what will the grant do? The grant is funding 3 topical meetings, and I'll talk about those in a bit, 4 regional meetings in the US, and at least 9 webinars. And at the very end, we'll have a ZooMuCon, and we haven't yet figured out what that will be. Um, ZooMu will also fund sending some museum people to the AZA meeting and some zoo people to a spinach meeting for that cross-pollinating. So the topical groups, we have 3 main topics. We have physical collections, we have cyber infrastructure, and human capacity. The cyber infrastructure already happened at Duke Lemur Center. Physical collections is happening next week. I haven't packed yet. And human capacity will happen in January. And you can kind of see in the Gantt chart, every year we have at least 2 things going on, although it looks like next year we have more. Regional meetings. The regions, there are 4 in the US. This is a map that we got from, I think, a government office. That's the 4 main regions of the United States as per some government agency. What you're noticing is the little blue dots are museums and the squares are zoos. And in most places where there's a museum, there's also a zoo or not too far away. And what you'll also notice is some of those regions are big and there can be a lot of things going on. The stars are where we will have the meetings. So the first one's going to be in Memphis, and then there'll be one in St. Paul, Minnesota. We're discussing whether San Francisco will be where we have the Western Regional or if we'll find somewhere more affordable. And then I'll be hosting the Northeast at Yale. And the one thing we started doing too is looking at the map and figuring out if we should redraw some of those boundaries so that maybe as far south as Washington, D.C. is the Northeast instead of the Southeast, just to take some pressure off the Southeast. They're a little full. And the idea is that the regional meetings will talk about issues that were brought up at the topical meetings, but from a very regional centric perspective. Some very basic things like if an elephant dies at Omaha, who can go get it? All right, who has a truck? That sort of thing. Um, or what are the regional regulations about transporting things? All right, the physical collections, we are going to focus largely on developing best practices and material transfer agreements between zoos and museums so that when that elephant dies, you already know where it will go and you don't have to scramble to figure it out. And another thing we're hoping to do is almost every zoo that we've talked to has a cryo collection. They have frozen blood. They have tissue samples of things. Some have tissue samples of rehab animals that went through the hospital. So they'll have tissue samples of sandhill cranes or something. But you don't know that because you're not at that zoo. Can we get those parts of their collection shareable and findable? For cyber infrastructure, it's funny that it's out of order. We met with this group first. This group was looking at the databases that zoos use and the databases that museums use and trying to connect those and also trying to get zoos on GBIF. So we were successful. I think we've got 3, and maybe Cameron can correct me when he gets going. I think we have 3 zoos now that are on GBIF and share their inventory on GBIF. So you can actually look up and see what does the Memphis Zoo have. That's a good for, or who do I contact? That's also very, very useful. Who is the person at the zoo to contact to ask a question? All right. All right, and the last working group is going to be human capacity. We meet in New Orleans in January, and the main focus on that, well, there's 2 focuses, 2 foci. One is the education pipeline. How do you produce people who do research at zoos? We all kind of understand how we produce people who use museums for research, but how does it happen in zoos? And can we share ideas on how to make that happen? And the second is the cultural component. I hinted at it with some vocabulary. We started making a vocabulary list and what word to use when you talk to somebody in the other world. All right. And it can be very subtle. All right, and this is my last slide, just if you wanted to get more involved. You already have the website, because I think it was shared in chat, but we do have a standard Gmail address that we're using that the four of us use. We have a Google group for sharing ideas. We also have a Blue Sky page, and I don't have the link for that, but I think you can get there from the web page. All right, so I will unshare and hand it over to Cameron.
Yeah,
And I
I'm
will
going to do
mute.
the tough part of sharing my screen as well. Let's see. Scroll down. You probably see two screens. What does this look like?
So far, it's blue.
Is it blue? There's a text and blue?
Oh, now we have your sort of layout for your program, but not the presentation mode.
Interesting. Okay, that's good.
We
I
can see
think.
like all of PowerPoint.
That's totally fine. I don't have any notes. I go off the cusp. I'm just kidding. I don't. Let's see. Let's do this one. How does that look? Oh, sorry. Now.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that will be better. No secrets that I can share right now. Okay, yes, as Greg mentioned, my name is Cameron. I'm the Assistant Collection Manager of Vertebrate Zoology at the Network Museum of Nature and Science. So that just means I deal with all the mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians that come through our door and are stored in our collections. And we have about a collection of 1.3 million items, but that is also including our entomology collection. But I still like to brag about the million number. It's not even over 100,000 for vertebrates, but we're getting there. We're getting there. But this is a presentation that I actually did at the Spinach Conference this past summer, talking about the collaboration that stemming from the ZooMu conversations and also just the proximity of our two institutions, that it seemed like the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, it's a no-brainer that this kind of projects kind of involve both sides. So I'm also going to include information given to me by Jessica Grote, who's the registrar at the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance, and I had help from my collection manager, Andrew Dahl, who's the collection manager of zoology here. Let's see if this works. Let's do this. Okay, so yeah, I want to talk about the zoo first. The zoo was founded in 1896 when it adopted an American black bear cub that was given to the mayor as a gift. And the mayor was like, well, I don't know how to take care of this. And so he actually started a zoo for this reason. It was a really cool start to it. And the initial focus of the zoo was, about acquiring native animals like bison, horses, like smaller mammals. So it was really cool to see them try to include naturalistic zoo enclosures rather than just cages. If you look up Bear Mountain at the Denver Zoo, you'll see a cool picture of it. They're actually doing work on it right now to kind of increase the productivity of that space. But it's really cool to see a zoo try to look forward so often. And it's really cool that it's like right next door, but I'll talk about that a little bit. To briefly talk about the museum itself, the museum was founded and opened to the public in 1908 after actually 5 years of us having a collection that it was stored in the Capitol building and then moved to where we built a new museum for. And the first collection actually was, zoology. So we have that over paleontology, where Edwin Carter Denver bought the collection of mammals and birds from across the Rocky Mountain region and brought them to Denver to start the museum. And then over the course of the last 50 years or so, we've of course doubled our collection side, and we have done expeditions to collect animals from 6 major continents to build up our collection, build up our dioramas, and build up just the storage facilities of that. So, and then to talk about how close we are, this is how close we are. We see them from our window, and we are just right there. It's a 5-minute walk apart from the zoo to the museum. So it's a great way to, when I have to go pick up animals, I just walk over. If they want to have a meeting over with us, they actually prefer our food over their own food, which is crazy. And it's just because we have a salad bar. And I was like, that's not a reason to come over here and eat our food. But I digress. We still have that kind of collaboration in that sense. So animal transfers have been happening since the opening of both institutions. What we can gather is that records show that in 1903, a moose and a fallow deer were transferred over from the zoo to the museum and were part of the collection. Of course, over time, the communication is set up between different groups. We worked with the veterinary staff, we worked with the registrars, we worked with the directors and them directly to kind of handle the transfers. And of course, agreements were made to be like, what happens when the zoo gives the museum things and what do they expect from the museum back? And so animals transferred to the DMNS are processed into our research collection, and the data is published through our collection management system, Arctos, which many of you are probably familiar with, and we use that to host all of our data. So what does it look like? We have in Arctos, a project that actually shows what we have shared between the two institutions. And so that QR code will take you to the project page that shows, what we've transferred, what citations have been made from the animals that we have in our collection, as well as, the birds, mammals, and herps split out, and also the citations and anything specific for like newspaper articles and stuff like that. We want to connect all of that information together into one place. So it's an easy enough a website that we can just have all that information at. And in terms of identifiers that specifically go into Arctos from zoo, we try to include identifiers, the lineage, the simple attribute traits, and like, the life stage, all that kind of stuff that they allow us to publish in Arctos. Large animals, like, I would say from, what is the smallest animal? Maybe like a fox, a coyote. We do that the same day. Anything larger than that, we'll probably try to process the same day. Other smaller things like the guinea pig I just picked up, I put that in the freezer and I say I'm going to save it for a rainy day. And that's kind of where we're going to go forward with it. So everything else is kept in a -10-degree freezer, walk-in freezer, so that we can process it at a later date. Right now, there is an orangutan downstairs that is being processed by the prep lab, and we got that last week. And so we are working on putting that into the collection, going through the domestic colony and all that stuff. Right now, underneath my feet right now, which is actually pretty cool. And I am in the cryovault room where we store all the tissues behind me in those giant tanks. It's a great background, actually. I didn't think about that. So to tie in and talk about our procedures going from the, right now, but in the past, we pick up animals at the zoo. So I'll actually walk over there. I'll either get our building operations people to take me over in a golf cart. And I'm just like, can you be my chauffeur for today? Or I'll drive my personal vehicle. And that means that I have had dead animals in the back of my car, which my cats adore, but my family does not like to know that. And then animals are prepared in the collections in different preparation types, as we all know, from study skins, skin clips, the skeletons. The tissue samples are kept, of course, in the cryo storage behind me. And then standardized measurements are put into Arctos once we can gather them. The specimen preparation sheet is what we kind of use to catalog the records physically. So it's a kind of an archive that we use ourselves to include the identifiers, the origin, all that stuff, physically as well as digitally. And then researchers, if they request any zoo animals, we will be able to pull information from Arctos or GBIF, and that lets them see what we have from, specific institutions or for specific geographies. So what we're thinking of is that in the future, we want to be able to understand the process and make it streamlined, of course, make it so there's not too much work happening on either end, but improve and enhance kind of what we do between both institutions. So of course, we're going to pick up animals at the zoo to be processed in the preparation lab. The preparation sheets will be uploaded into Arctos as usual, but we also want to include some life history. So anything from their database systems, ZIMS or tracks or anything other than that will also be included in that publicly available information. And then the data that we provide back to DZCA might include things like, if we see some pathologies that they're not going to get from their own necropsies that we might see later on once the beetles have cleaned the skeleton, and we can see kind of like, I've seen severe cases of arthritis and things like that in the skeleton, and they're not going to see that from their first look. So we might be able to provide that information in form of, images. They can come over and see it in the collection and things like that. And of course, sharing them with them when that specimen is used for publications, for citations for other research that's going on. And then we also want them to be up to date on what Arctos and GBIF and these other database systems are used for and how to utilize them. So we're actually getting them started in using Arctos themselves, setting up with accounts so they have access to the information, but also, as Greg mentioned before, getting them on GBIF so that we have them to be able to share their information out. And that's going to be something that is happening in the near future, very near future. Talk about recent collaborations that we've done across the board. We had a hippo and a rhino skull sent over, or we again walked it over to be CT scanned in their veterinary hospital. So that information and those scans are now available on Morphosource because they transferred to us, and then I'm always been curious about digitization and things like that, and so I have a lot of background in CT scanning specifically. And so I use that to be like, well, hey, if we take these CT scans, I can make a digital model of it and we can use that in different ways, different projects. And so that's what happened last year. The previous entomology curator was able to do a cool study on dung beetles, actually captured from their hoofstock staff, hoofstock, populations and things, the live collections. And then staff at both institutions, of course, are joined in the ZooMu network and have been very fortunate and been very forward about joining us and trying to help in any ways that we can. You can actually see me in the background of that picture being mad that I'm not in the room because they only allowed one person in, and of course my boss had the first hall to go into there. So I don't need to rehash this that much, but if you notice, there's a QR code to talk about ZooMu network. I was able to go in March to North Carolina to join for the cyber infrastructure group. And I think my favorite thing was just to see the difference in vocabulary, which fascinating, because I think we talked hours on it on job, just like, so what do you mean by data? And then I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is like my wheelhouse. And so we get to help, talk about that common language, see how we can foster that collaboration, and talk about like Darwin Core and how that might be related to what zoos can do and maybe create a whole core system in itself. But also having the ability to publish new zoo data to the public, while of course respecting the sensitivity of zoo data, because a lot of things, they've kept close to their heart because they're not fearful of what could happen if all that information is public, but to understand where we can use that and what is possible when that data is actually publicly available. So the future of our collaboration, we've actually been building on stuff behind the scenes of even ZooMu to kind of increase that. We've been increasing collaboration and communication between our two teams. It's been really cool to see that kind of foster. Our new mammal curator, Holly Lutz, has been working really closely with their pathologist at the zoo, Su Chan, to kind of help figure out what kind of research we can actually do together. And that's been really cool. And then we're trying to figure out what happens with the CT scans, because of course they have their own repository of CT scans that might be able to be published in Morphosource to be publicly available. I can help with that. They can, make their own accounts. And then, considering the implementation of biobanking, as you see behind me, we have giant tanks. They're less than half full right now. We're not trying to fill them up right now. We're not going to get it any more anytime soon, but the implication is that we do have the ability to help biobanking if they need it. And we're, of course, talking about that as well, as including cell culturing, which is a whole other topic that is going to be getting into, the ethics and methods of doing cell culturing in these two institutions, but we are talking about that right now. So in the works right now, we are trying to create a guideline and manual for the transfer of animals and documents in the industry, between just like how it's kind of a case study, because we are fortunate that we're so close that it is a collaboration that's happened for decades. And so how have we kind of refined it, how we did, and what can we look about in the future? The DZCS also wants to be added operationally to Arctos, so they are going to be collaborators and able to see the data, pull the information, be operators per se in Arctos, but then we're also going to get them into GBIF, GR Cycall, Morphosaurus, so they can have a greater branch into the museum kind of natural history side of what data is available and what is available for them to see. In the works is also a cool thing where we want to do publications as well as exhibits, temporary exhibits that talk about both of our collaborations. So we both have spaces in their hospital and in our second floor that kind of talk about upcoming research. Is on a rolling basis every few months. And so we are actually going to try to create signage, like sister signage at the same time that talks about a relationship. Will be really cool. So I want to thank you guys for listening. I have two discussion questions that we can kind of go into, but I'll go back to the slide so you can gather it. So one of my questions was, there seems to be a tendency for researchers requesting information from museums to disregard captive animal data, but then also vice versa, where researchers that are looking at live animal data just want to see the live animal and they don't request the museum, even though there might be some connections between the two. So why do you believe that there is this sort of, tendency to do that? But then also, what information do you wish could be more available coming from either museums or zoos in this regard, in terms of like, live animal data that has been transferred over to museums versus museum data that can be published through zoos in that kind of regard? So thank you again, and feel free to ask any questions.
Well, thank you, Greg and Cameron. Yeah. Um, so just because of how the breadth of the group of MEPA, we were trying to do something new. We're trying to do some parts in English, some parts in Spanish, maybe some parts in Portuguese at some point. So I'm going to do the next part in Spanish, but I'm going to put the text of what I'm going to say in English down here. And so it's basically just to start the conversations. Okay, this is in English. It's in the chat in Spanish. Muchas gracias, Greg y Cameron. Fue una excelente presentación y definitivamente muy relevante para la comunidad de MEPA, porque expande nuestra visión de cómo los biorepositorios de museos pueden conectar con los datos primarios que no han sido comúnmente considerados hasta ahora, como los de los zoológicos y de animales en captividad. Ahora abriremos el espacio para comentarios, preguntas y discusión. Y si todos pudieran encender sus cámaras, sería muy bueno para fomentar la comunidad y conversar con personas reales en lugar de pantallas. Okay, so I wanted to, the question I'm going to do is going to be in English, unless you, Cameron or Greg, you're comfortable with Spanish, but I'll do it in English for everybody first. And so you talked about something like biorepository agreements with the zoos, which have been a topic in this group for a little while now, because first, they don't necessarily exist and they are not necessarily homogeneous across different institutions and things like that. Are you thinking on making them so all museums can use similar formats for to work with this zoos?
One of the things we're trying to do, or hoping to do, is have, we're developing those MOUs and MTAs, have templates people can download and maybe edit if they need to, but have it be a consistent language between the types of institutions. Even to get a specimen from a zoo, the forms you have to fill out, even if you know they've got it, every zoo has their own form. There is a standard form. They don't all use it. So if we can try to, like you said, make it standard and homogeneous across institutions, it will help. And I think we're going to be able to do that with, I don't even know, many. Some will do that, but that's one of the hopes.
And if I may add a question for Cameron, your last question in your slide was very relevant to something I wanted to ask. And it was, are you referring to the fact that some research are disregarding samples from animals that have been in captivity when they are trying to understand disease ecology or evolution that comes from animals?
Yeah, pretty much. Like we've seen it firsthand where if I get a request for like all of the species in a specific group, and then I give them that list, they're like, oh, well, I want to get rid of anything that is from the zoo, even though it might be recently as of like last year, and it will still offer the same kind of value in their research. They just seem to be, their question seems to be more pointed at the wild type specimens that are, either from the native origins and things like that, where hopefully we can talk about the conversation where like, it is a huge breadth of our collections. It's also those captive animals that kind of relate to the connectivity of those two types of the wild versus the captive. Really, the overlap should be more used than I've seen.
I'll say from a disease ecology modeler, I think the caveat of using those kind of samples could be related to the fact that we're trying to understand a natural phenomenon that is dynamic, and it's probably going to be a little bit not biased, but a little bit it's going to diffuse a little bit if you integrate those other types of sampling. Although that is only because we're not yet integrating a lot of the interfaces where we actually interact with these animals, which includes captivity and a lot of the other things that we do around natural ecosystems.
Definitely.
Yeah, I've had people refuse captive, and it makes sense if they're studying stomach content. What did this thing eat in the wild? Then having white mice or whatever is not really the answer. But if they want to know how many teeth are in the skull, something like that, there are many questions can be answered with captive or wild.
I like to add that sometimes, even from what I've learned from like ZooMu and stuff like that, just because we say captive once it reaches us, it does not mean that it was always captive, in that sense that it actually did have a life before it got to the zoo. It might have been rehabilitation, it might have been rescued, it might have been poached. And that means that the history before that we don't even know, because we only have it at the time of death. Beforehand, it could have been wild and then just kind of brought into a different zoo, and that's kind of like where we want to bridge that gap, because there's so much life history that we don't know about some of these captive animals, even though they could have been a mix of the two.
Beto, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's funny that you brought the language thing, because I actually just out of grad school, I worked for a year in the Zoológico de São Paulo, the São Paulo Zoo, which is probably the largest in Brazil. And it's funny because the whole language is quite different, and maybe that's part of the answer for Cameron's question of the communication between both groups, and I had to kind of get used to this new language, and then I went back to the museum world, and I noticed that the language is quite different. And it's funny that we don't talk too much, these two words, because you actually can have as you guys said, we can have a lot of insights from, behavior, and also from the natural history of these animals. Of course, they are in captivity, and they have like the biases that Marlon mentioned, but still you can get a lot of insights. But you also can get some insights from behavior, from field work on observations on the wild animals, from behavior, and we kind of used it while I was working at the zoo, and it's a very interesting kind of trade. But still, we have some issues concerning, especially here in Brazil. Sometimes you have like animals that come from rescued animals that you don't even know where it came from, and at some point, maybe the talk with the museums and even DNA could help now to find out where these animals are from. But at that time, it wasn't even thought of. And also, that there wasn't tissue sampling or even only the animals that were interesting for some rare animal that was interesting for some museum. The guy would come with his pickup truck and carry a bear from and just ride around with a bear in his trunk. It was quite funny, but I don't know. I think it kind of answers the questions that Cameron brought. Most of the time, we don't even speak the same language, and that's the main issue, maybe. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys is how how often do you meet for or did you meet for do you have like regular meetings for this kind of exchange we have here in the MEPA?
So
Thanks.
yeah, great comments. So after every topical working group workshop, they form a working group team, and then those groups meet monthly. And the idea is that once a year, there'll be a big webinar like this, where we would invite anybody interested in the cyber infrastructure of zoos and museums, come on in, anybody interested in human capacity or whatever. We've talked about having, well, when we had our startup webinar, there were, do you remember, Cameron, was it something like, maybe you don't even know this number. I think we had like 400 or 500 registrants for that, and it was insane. But it was great. It was a good insanity. People around the world interested, so that was a good thing. I think we may start doing that again. It might have to be annual at first until we get some more of these workshops under our belt, but it's a good thing to have open mic.
Ali, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, hi everyone. Thank you very much for the talk. This is regarding the first question from Cameron and this question also from Andrew. About why they disregard animals from the zoo, right? And what happened here in Ecuador is that we do have zoos, yes, but we have also, and a lot more than zoos, we have rescue centers. So when someone finds a animal, they go there, so they take care of this animal. When the environmental police confiscate animals from trafficking, animal trafficking, they go to these special centers. So here we don't have any information from locality, age, or the background of the animal. And that's why we do not, most of the time, we don't use those animals. And it's interesting because here where it's different, right? We don't have the zoos and we don't have that information. So what should we do with that, or how do we work with that? Is there any other is a similar experience there in States with rescue centers or whatever? What do you do with those animals?
We've talked about, after the zoos and aquariums are on board, do we include wildlife rehabilitators? Because they also have mortality and they will have data. In terms of data on where that wildlife rehab animal came from, I've found oftentimes all I will be able to see is where the donor found it. And that's if they say. Sometimes it was on the road somewhere. So there can be some indication of a broad geographic sense for locality data, but that's about all you're going to get from those or which window it hit on the building. that
Yeah,
kind
that's
of
right.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that you may have really good data, you know, the north window on, you know, but
Yeah, and as you said, it depends on the question, right?
right, for sure.
What do you, yeah.
For sure. So I think I do think that the rehabilitator centers are like the next untapped resource, because they have, in some cases, a crazy amount of animals that go through their door in a year. And sometimes they'll get like birds we've never documented in the state. So, no.
Actually have that same thing here where there's a rehabilitation center, it's called GWRC, the Greenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. And when I say that we get thousands of animals from them, it is literally thousands that we will sort through. And of course, we're looking for valuable specimens in this case. So we're not going to take all 1,000 that they give us, but we'll look through to make sure at least it has address, county, that they know what species it is. And then that will be like the most information that we need before we are saying, okay, we will pull this aside, we'll put it into the freezer, and we'll work it out at some point. So it's just, yeah, that is like the level of rehabilitation centers that has really been really great for our sense, because we don't do a lot of field work. We have just 2 main researchers, curators that don't go into the field that much because they also have administration roles as well. And so that has been a really cool source for it. And to quickly answer like the information on like locality and microbiological specimens, like I definitely seen our zoo, like when they give us the zoo transfer files, they definitely provide where else those animals have been from. So whether or not they were captured in the wild or brought from another zoo. And then when they do a necropsy, they do a necropsy on every single animal that goes through mortality at the zoo. And so they're going to be capturing all the histology, all of the things that they can capture. And if we find anything, we definitely share it with them. But most of the time, if they find any parasites or things like that, they'll also probably biobank it themselves. And now the conversation is, can they also share that material with us so that we can share it in a different way?
We have 3 more questions at least. Hugo.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to see so many old faces, home faces. And no, it's just to reinforce the idea of Alejandra. Here in Colombia, we have, I think, a pretty well-structured environmental system, starting with the Ministry of Environment. And the technical branch of this ministry is called the SINA, is the environmental information system, something like that. And as part of that, we have something that are called the regional corporations. And the regional corporations, they have centers for, not for rehabilitation, but for concentrating the animals that people find everywhere, that they are also rescue for trafficking, and all the stuff that is happening in Ecuador is the same thing in Colombia. But the idea, talking with the Minister of Environment, the last Minister of Environment, was to put all these regional centers, because we have divided these centers by regions in Colombia, and use it for surveillance. And I think that's the real, I think that's the real deal of these type of centers, because it's an open window to see what is circulating around, particularly in places in which we have a lot of disturbance in terms of the environment. For example, we have deforestation areas, huge areas of deforestation in Colombia, and we don't know what is happening, for example, with dilution effect in these regions. So having these animals, despite they are like, we don't know exactly from where they come from or exactly the origin, is definitely a window to do some surveillance and see what is circulating around.
That's a good point. When West Nile and avian flu circulate, it's often the zoo birds that get noticed, because, yes, the wild birds are also dying, and John Bates will probably say, oh yeah, they are. The sandhill crane on display is the one you see being sick. So the vets can work that up and actually determine what was causing it. And that's sometimes the first sign that there's something going on.
Hernani. We had a question from Andrew Hope as well. It's in the chat now. Andrew, do you want to talk about it, or do you want to leave it there in the chat?
Well, I put it in there to try and, I know we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
just briefly, I mean, I'm at Kansas State University, and there's a huge veterinary diagnostics lab here that caters to all of the dead zoo animals from multiple different zoos. And so the zoos are not, they're out of the picture with dealing with universities, and they don't, I mean, there's no paperwork in place from the diagnostic lab to then deal with them because they're like, we don't have the authority to deal with zoo specimens. We don't want to make that call because they didn't belong to us in the first place.
That's a good point. Not every zoo has its own vet team. So, you know what? I'll bring that up next week when we meet with the physical collections people, which includes a few vets, and we'll see what we can do about that.
Hernani.
Oh, hello. Thank you for the nice talk. I was in transit in part of the talk, so I'm sorry if this has already been mentioned, like by you in the talk. But we have initiative like here in Brazil that we are connecting like different collections of pathogens. Like, and I was curious to hear from you in terms of the system that you use to connect like the museums and the collections when you have like something available. So let's say an animal dies, like how do you connect the museums with the next like stage of like for the collections to go there to deal with all the paperwork and things like that, like in terms of the system that's involved in these connections, like.
Well,
you go ahead.
Okay, so I guess when we hear about an animal that passes away, the registrar will reach out to us personally. So they'll just email us and say like, hey, this animal passed away, would you like it? To like offer it up to us. And then after that, they will go into like, we have a contract for the year, pretty much like, you know, these are specimens that a contract between the two where all we need is like the specimen report from them, and then we will provide them pretty much our accession record that just says like this group of animals, all animals that die in the zoo that are transferred to the museum are underneath this umbrella of a contract. And so that means that, you know, as we go forward, we just continue to add animals to the accession, but it's not until the end of the year where we actually say like, this is the final number of what we've transferred. And this actually kind of goes back to the MOU that was mentioned in the chat as well. So if something goes to like megafauna, like elephants, giraffes, they are not going to be processed at the zoo. They're actually going to be processed at CSU, or it's in Fort Collins, about an hour north of us. But in our contract or in our transfer agreement, it says that, you know, all of the, you know, the animal, after it's been done necropsy, it will come back to us. And so we have that kind of in our wording that, you know, even if it goes to a different place to be necropsied, it will still be able to be transferred to us. And then also that means the animal was not owned specifically by the zoo. They do a great job of actually allowing us to, they'll actually reach out to the zoo and be like, hey, can we transfer this animal to the museum because it's dead? And like, you know, it's of course unfortunate circumstances, but they will still allow them to be like, okay, yeah, that zoo was the previous owner. They say it's okay for them to come to our museum, and then we can transfer it, and it will be the same kind of process despite that. So before anything, it will always be kind of written out in some way that we have a transfer agreement between the zoo, the museum, and then any other entities that are involved in that kind of transfer. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
John, will you jump in there with our last question before we wrap up? I have posted a link to a session evaluation in the chat. If you have to leave early, please click that link and send us some comments before you go. Go ahead, John.
So I really just want to make a comment. Thanks for a great presentation. I think it's a great program. And one of the things that I was impressed about with zoos was when the Field Museum got a Major Mitchell's cockatoo from the Brookfield Zoo named Cookie. And Cookie was an adult when the zoo opened and died at 83 years old as the oldest parrot in the world. And we were talking about surveillance, and I think that one of the things zoos can do is sample things over time. And I went back and asked the Brookfield Zoo, I said, do you guys happen to have samples for Cookie? And they said, give us a little time. And it took them a while to get back to me. And they came back and they said, you know, we're really sorry, we only have it back to 1975. And I'm just thinking, like,
you know, wild animals are unlikely to have a lot of temporal sampling like that. And you might learn a lot of that at the genomic level that could be really interested with, particularly with respect with pathogens and things.
There are a few museums that are receiving blood samples from the zoo every time they sample an animal. So I think it's the Museum of the Southwest that has blood samples from the same elephant for the last 20 years, like twice a year. So you could do something.
Very cool. We are out of time. I would like to thank our speakers again for a delightful presentation, and we hope to see everyone here again in 2 weeks, where we have a presentation by Dr. Marcia Chamé. Beto, help me with pronunciation. She's from Cruz.
Chami.
Thank you. So it should be a really good presentation. We will see you in 2 weeks, and we'll send a reminder. Feel free to continue conversations on our WhatsApp channel and follow us on Blue Sky. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Cameron.
Bye, everyone.